Today we're looking at the economy in the South and the expansion of slavery in the South. And in a lot of ways, that all begins with the cotton industry. So in the South, the cotton gin is going to completely transform the cotton industry in the South. So what the cotton gin did is it made the separating of the seeds from the cotton much faster and easier. And that in turn made wide-scale production of cotton more possible. And meanwhile, there was also a huge increase in the profit in the cotton industry. And so more and more southern farmers began to adopt cotton as their key cash crop. And as that happened, it also greatly increased the demand for slaves as well. So cotton accounted for like half of the value of all American exports by 1840, and the South produced half of the world's cotton supply by 1840 as well. And not only did a lot of the cotton go from the South to the northern factories here in the United States, but Britain was basically dependent on cotton in the South. And so the cotton gin had a huge impact on the economy in these southern colonies. So in the South, we had an aristocracy kind of built around the plantation. So at the top of this hierarchy were your planter aristocrats. They had most of the political power, they had most of the social power, and they had these huge, large plantation estates with many, many slaves, sometimes hundreds of slaves on a single estate. But that only made up a very small percentage of the population. Underneath that were smaller farmers who had smaller plots of land and maybe had 10 or fewer slaves. But overall, even with the large planter aristocrats and these smaller farmers, only about a fourth of all plantations in the South actually had slaves. But a lot of smaller farmers were put out of work by these large plantations and basically forced to sell their land to larger plantation owners. Most of the population in the South were small farmers without slaves, and they pretty much operated at a subsistence level. They grew mostly corn instead of cotton because they were mostly growing for themselves. Then underneath that were a class of free blacks. You also had what were called your mountain whites up in the Appalachian Mountains, who still lived under kind of frontier conditions. And about 250,000 or so free blacks were in the South. Many mulattoes, some purchased their freedom, some owned property, some even owned their own slaves. But many were also forbidden from things like education. Certain occupations were forbidden to blacks in the South as well. And then, of course, at the bottom of society were your slaves.